So, how did I get from being a Bible-beating, Kool-Aid chugging fundamentalist to a raging occult enthusiast? Sit back, grab a blanket and a snack, and pour a piping hot cup of tea. It was a long journey. Hey wild things, it's Cypris, and I'm gonna share my transformation. Anyway, it took me a long time to get here, and I'll bet that many of you have had some similar experiences, and to me, that's what makes sharing these moments of awkwardness and painfully slow internal development so worthwhile. And for those of you new to some of this, or even the hate watchers, I'll clarify right now that the word occult does not mean evil. I know that it has been given that connotation in some circles, but denotatively, the occult refers to what's hidden. In this case, hidden knowledge. It refers to doing the deep work of discovery, either in the self or in the way the world around us really works. And the only reason that knowledge might be labeled as forbidden is because organized religion has a strong track record of wanting to make sure its members take the spoon-fed stuff without a fuss.
You are suffering because your faith is not strong enough.
Okay, with that out of the way, I started out about as far from a life embracing magical practice as possible, with only one noteworthy exception: the appreciation of, even a reverence for, nature. My mother loved gardening when I was little, and she taught me how to get pigment from an iris flower to paint with. And she showed me by example that getting into nature was how to center and get answers. As well, I had a grandfather who was a farmer and Christian, but he considered nature his church. I mean, he also choked his fields in chemical pesticides, herbicides, and fertilizers that are now banned even in the States. But hey, they were naive times. As well, my usually rather ragey father was calmer and less of a threat when we were in the forest camping. So my family, overall, did teach me that the forest was sacred space. Not a bad foundation, really. And then every birthday, of course, I'd make a wish on a candle. But aside from that, there was really nothing in my life to recommend a magical practice. There was no spooky forest-dwelling grandmother to teach me about herbs and crystals, and absolutely no exposure to the craft, other than the persecutory ideology I was indoctrinated with as a Christian. Honestly, growing up, I think the only other people we even knew were other wasps. And as I've mentioned, my upbringing was not only conservative, but fundamentalist. We couldn't bring playing cards into the church buildings because their origin takes inspiration from tarot decks. And tarot cards are evil, right? Because divination is forbidden to Christians, unless, of course, you're using the Bible to get magical answers by flipping to a random page. Then it's totally fine. Also, face masks were forbidden on Halloween costumes. I think it was something about hiding your real identity being too close to how demons operate, or something like that. So, funny story. Because of that, I stopped dressing up as a different animal every year and started dressing as a vampire, because that's more Christian, right? 'Cause no mask necessary. Yeah. Anyway, the point here is to reveal how I got from that, and I was hardcore. Hook, line, and sinker, folks. So how did I get from that to the absolute opposite ideological framework? The short answer would be that planet-sized murky ocean of cultural and institutionalized misogyny. I mean, if I'm being honest. But that's a depressing topic, and my journey out of the church really requires its own video, I think. I do have a video up where I explain how toxic Christianity was for me in general. I'll link that in the description should you be interested. But what I want to focus on today is what drew me to the craft, more so than what pushed me away from organized religion and forced me to find answers. If it's even possible to really keep those two things separate. Alright, as we've covered, as a kid I had zero exposure to magical or occult practice of any kind. That is, until middle school. On the way to school every day, I shared a seat with Vicky. I didn't know her, but she started sitting down next to me every day. Vicky had a flowy, hippie-ish, largely black wardrobe. She smelled of patchouli and wore little sachets of herbs around her neck. I think we became seat buddies because we were mutually avoiding the bullies. At 12, I didn't recognize her aesthetic for what it was, but I liked that she didn't suffer from the peer pressure gene. One morning on the bus, she whips out a pack of tarot cards and is studying it. I had no idea what they were, but I was intrigued, then horrified when she told me what they were. But aren't those evil? I asked. She was annoyed with me. Rightly so. I was immediately so confused. I had sat next to this girl every morning for weeks. I knew she was good people. I believed her. I felt that she knew what she was talking about. So her assertion that the tarot cards were not evil started a rift for me between the church and the truth. Before the end of middle school, she was gone. I know not where. Maybe her family moved away. After that, it was more than 10 years before I had any other exposure outside my factory set wheelhouse. My next brush with the occult didn't come until my early to mid-20s. I've always had an interest in symbolism, metaphor, all that stuff, and I got to researching written symbols. In that process, I came across the pentagram and was gobsmacked to read that it was a protection symbol. This is not what I've been taught. I knew the symbol as some sort of wicked hex. I was shocked, reeling even, and much like Pandora, there was no way I wasn't going to open that box now. So I kept digging. Now, this was before the internet was really a going concern. It existed, but as more of a novelty. So I was working with paper books and card catalogs, and sourcing was slow. But in the due course of my early research, I discovered that witches were, in fact, not evil! And that their primary creed was to first do no harm. Again, opposite of everything my religion had taught me. I was truly blown away by this. That's how indoctrinated I was. I was curious to learn more, of course, but I was processing hard. I was furious because I was betrayed by the church leadership. They freaking lied to me. I'm not blaming any individuals, of course. They were fed the same hateful propaganda I was. But my church, the very font of truth in my life, had freaking lied to me. Somewhere up the chain, somebody made the decision to vilify the occult. This is a common problem with organized religion. I just had no idea at the time because I was a kid. In my excitement at discovering this information and breaking through a major impediment to real knowledge, I shared my discovery with someone dear to me. Bad idea. She hears what I've learned and gets really weird with me, and voice almost trembling, snarls into the phone at me. But thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. Okay, 1, this was information I'd found, not a conversion. It was simply data. 2, as you can imagine, experiencing a close relative offering to burn me alive put a bit of a strain on our relationship. 3. That's not even what the Bible actually says! That was an intentional alteration in the King James Version just to make the monarch happy because hunting witches was his favorite hobby. The actual line reads more like, "Thou shalt not suffer a murderer to live." So, yeah, a bit different. So, I do love this person, still, but it's always good to know when your family members are opting to take the side of the lynch mob. You know, I appreciate the honesty. And to be fair, this was many years ago now. It's entirely possible that her willingness to commit familial homicide has lessened with time. Over the next few years, I continued to learn what I could of truth. Not just about the occult, but everything cosmological, including my own denomination, still. And yeah, spoiler, it did turn out to be like the biggest web of lies ever. Lies! 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 I had learned too much. It just wasn't real. I ended up with no religion and searching for something real I could believe in. I was having to reconstruct a new cosmology from scratch. I took a world religion course. I looked at Islam, Judaism, Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism, Hinduism, like all of it. But then one day, digging through clearance tables at Borders Books, yeah, way back when we still had bookstores, I found this book. For anyone not familiar, this is basically a beginner's introduction to witchcraft. I was intrigued, but nervous. I had learned so deeply that this was playing with fire, like hellfire. But by now, I knew, at least on paper, that witches weren't evil and that, broadly, paganism tended toward a great reverence for nature. And honestly, that sounded pretty good to me. So I didn't see the harm in learning a little bit about witchcraft from an actual witch. I don't think I could have explained it at the time, but I think what charmed me about witches and witchcraft was that it held something that all other traditions lacked. Women empowered to participate directly and fully in the work. Women in the roles of priesthood. As I've mentioned at other times, being a female has limited me in so many ways and left me vulnerable to so many abuses. Finding an ideology that reversed that trend in both theory and practice was like waking up from a nightmare into a world that makes sense. The New York Times recently published part of a collection of photographs of women who identify as witches, and what struck me as I scrolled through the images was that I wasn't seeing Hollywood's interpretation of witches. What I was seeing was simply women standing in their power realized from discovering their real selves and living in that truth. And this is what it is for me: empowerment, freedom to exist as myself. And to not have to make myself smaller to keep men comfortable with me. Oop, don't forget to smile. The magic work, the ritual, it's fun, even fulfilling. But the crux of it for me is self-actualization. So finally, in my late 20s, I made the leap. Oh, not a conversion. No, not yet. But really? It was, because I performed my first spell. Just, to try it out. As an experiment. It's difficult to explain how natural it felt. Assembling the tools, oils, candles, like getting a piece of my soul back. My first spell was one for abundance, largely modeled after the one in this book. And just as promised, everything in my life changed. Just not the way I expected. The resultant upheaval was difficult and painful, but absolutely for my good. You see, what happened was that I woke up to how bad my marriage was. I had been in complete denial, and I was disappearing into nothingness. So I woke up, like literally. I had a couple of dreams that really didn't mince words or symbols, as it were, and realized I had to fix it or perish. And I got myself out. A giant, whopping 30th birthday present to myself. And that was that, really. I continued to dabble with ritual and to learn more and more about how it works and how to do psyche work. And I studied the history of the great goddesses and how the first gods were mothers. But still, actually taking on for myself the title of witch was something I resisted for a very long time. See, I've been burned to death at least a couple of times. It's not pleasant. What sticks with you isn't so much the sting of ash and smoke in your lungs. Rather, it's the collective betrayal by the people you thought were your village. And growing up abused and bullied, this just amplified the trauma from those past lives and kept it all super raw. I finally got to a place where I realized that a recurring dream I'd had all my life was in fact a past life memory. Maybe I'll even tell you all about it sometime, but it deserves its own moment. Anyway, the point is that realizing the dream was actually a memory of old trauma gave me the context to process it, or at least to start to process it. And where I'm at with it now is essentially this. What? You're gonna burn me? Lynch me? Torture me to death? That's all you got? You know I'm just gonna reincarnate and indoctrinate your children, right? Okay, for anybody hate watching, that last bit was a joke. But this basically brings us to the present. I never did just decide one day that I wanted to be a witch. Rather, slowly, over time, I kept incorporating magical practices into my life that, to me, feel like coming home. As much as I enjoy going counterculture and sticking it to the oppressive patriarchy of my youth, it's the practical lifestyle habits and ideology of the craft that appeal to me. And let's get a little heavy just for a moment. A great draw for me is the fact that sexism is just not inherent to the craft. There are plenty of men witches out there, and that is a wonderful thing. But witchcraft has long been fused with the feminine, either to empower and celebrate it or to vilify and persecute it. Witchcraft in the cultural psyche is synonymous with women's autonomy and power and authority, and this is why I don't practice in secret, because to practice openly, formally, officially, disowns my assignation as less, as somehow filthy and sinful simply because I have ovaries. There are precious few modalities or ideologies in this world that aren't somehow tainted with misogyny. It's not intentional. We've simply inherited this mess. We try not to focus on it all the time. It's depressing, but it is always there. And it's exhausting living a transgressive life, being an inheritor of Eve. I would much rather transgress openly and willfully than accept my place. For all it makes me a target with aggressive conservatives, witchcraft is a safe space for me, an arena of self-exploration that somehow, miraculously, doesn't make me feel like I'm less of a person because of my gender. It's amazing how few of those spaces there are in this world, so I'm very, very lucky that the practice of magic and ritual and courting the gods resonates so deeply and honestly with me, because for me, it's an oasis of self. And backing up from the heavy stuff, let's just keep it real here. It's really fun. It's satisfying. And because witchcraft is more of an ideology and an art than it is a religion, everyone is free to develop their own individual practice. And that wild, random freedom of self-actualization is just the best thing ever. So now that I've talked your ears off about my journey, what is yours? Where are you at with all of this? Are you new here? Are you a lifelong native? What's your draw to the craft? What makes it valuable to you? I mean, this is fun stuff to talk about, right? So I look forward to hearing about it in the comments. In the meantime, I'll see you in the next video, and until then, keep the magic wild. Oh, I'm filming, so you must photobomb. Careful. Ah! That's the mic cord. Or even the hate watchers. Oh, winter air. Other than the persecutory. Other than the persecutory. Yep, definitely recommend a divorce as a 30th birthday celebration. It works wonders for everything.